until we have a couple other folks join.
Okay, let's start with item 1.
How about I call the meeting to order?
Yeah.
All right, so
Stickler for the rules.
officially begins the June 17th virtual meeting of the Indiana Charter School Board.
Okay, and then board minutes.
Right. I forgot we have to do actual voice vote on those as well.
Yep.
So I would entertain a motion from one of my fellow board members to approve the minutes from our last meeting.
Nick, is there any way in the bylaws that we can just do consensus on the minutes for fear that someone coming in might have a comment on them?
So Dr. Calvin, the way that the virtual the rules work is that you have to take a roll call vote unless it's a consensus. So if it's a unanimous vote, then you do not need to take a roll call. But given that we don't have everyone here that we are expecting to appear, it may be that we even skip this part and just do staff updates until we get enough people here, because there may be that somebody does have a comment on the minutes.
Okay.
So, I want to make sure that we're not, that we're following the rules. So if you want, I can just move to staff updates, because the first.
Yeah, that sounds fine, James.
That's wonderful.
Okay. Unfortunately, the first two are only going to take about 35 seconds. And then we start getting into the meat. Essentially, the first two staff updates relate to the fall application cycle and the renewal process, which, as you know, since the board approved sort of merging them, I think in 2019, both take place in the fall. The fall application cycle, we don't plan on any changes. We're just going to run it as normal. We have a tentative schedule in place. Hang on, I have to move down to that section in my notes. LOIs due August 14th, applications due September 25th, and the board meeting sometime during the first week of December. The renewal, the only difference is the applications are due by October 9th. Same meeting, first week in December. Of course, both of these things assume that there are no changes in condition due to COVID, no more shutdowns, no more anything like that would prevent us from conducting the cycle. The one thing that might make a difference is our ability to host virtual meetings. We had, so with Phelan, and I can repeat this later when we get to his the approval, there was no precedent for holding a public hearing virtually. So I had a long conversation with Luke Britt, who is the public access counselor, about whether or not it was appropriate for us to hold a public hearing for the school virtually. And he had said that this had come up with a couple of other agencies who were required to hold public hearings, and that they had essentially approved a process by which, similar to the process that we're following now in terms of virtual meetings, making sure everyone can hear, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, by which you can have public hearings virtually. So that's what we did for Earl. And, again, depending on the way things are, in August or September, the ability to continue to have virtual hearings depends on the governor's continuing declaration of emergency. So at any time, if the governor stops declaring us in a state of emergency, then our ability to host virtual meetings, virtual capacity interviews, virtual public hearings would cease. So we may make adjustments based on that. But as of now, we are planning to continue things business as usual. The one thing I will say about the renewal process, we have 4 schools up for renewal: Ace Prep, Steel City, Hyatt, and Excel Shelbyville. We're planning on, using our normal process with regards to 2018-19 data. but we'll modify it based on available 2019-2020 data. We can still include it like financial data and operational data, and an analysis and execution of the continuous learning plan at the end of the year, but we don't have any test data. So we won't be able to use any academic data in our analysis for 2019-2020, which would be, since we start our renewal process in the 5th year, normally we would be using that data as our 4th year of data. So I think the only difference you may see is, and there's precedent for this, that you may see more conditional renewal recommendations than normal. So that's the only change I anticipate with that. We felt like there was no point, after much internal discussion, in postponing renewal, because that sets a precedent that we didn't want to set. And quite frankly, we do have data that we can use. And, for example, if a school is not warranted a renewal based solely on financial data, I don't want to give them another year, basically, to further get in the hole if they should be closed because of financial reasons. So that's our reasoning there. I'm appreciating any comments if anyone has an issue with our plans there. Like I said, we'll update them as circumstances warrant with the current situation, but currently our plans are just to move forward. Any comments or anything? Okay. How many, have we gotten any new folks? I see Jill joined.
We have 6.
6 board members. So who are we missing?
Gretchen and Janet.
Gretchen and Jen. Okay. So let me move forward then on the staff thing. I think just in the sake of fairness, we should wait to have as many of the board members we know are attending before we have the action on the proposal. If with the chair's discretion there, I just feel like that's the most appropriate. So I'm going to move on. I'm going to try to keep this quick because there's a lot of information and a lot of moving parts. The reason that staff updates were moved to the front this time is because a lot of what we're going to be discussing in the staff updates are directly relevant to both our action items and our accountability discussion. So we wanted to sort of give you the lay of the land before we actually even moved into those areas. Some of the stuff is going to be repetitive because it was in the information we provided you. But the ICSB finds itself in an interesting position right now. Historically, we've received an appropriation. We've received appropriation basically every year since 2013. The most recent budget, the 2019-2020 budget, significantly decreased our appropriation. The reason for this is that the budget bill starts with the governor's recommended budget, and then obviously the legislature makes changes based on whatever they want to do in their various hearings. The way that the governor's office determines an appropriation for an agency is they review the total expenditures from the first year of the prior year's budget. So we're talking, they reviewed our 2018 expenditures. And our 2018 expenditures were lower than normal for a variety of reasons. And so they just cherry picked that number as our current appropriation. It's 30% less than what we had been receiving. There's a process by which they allow you to submit what are called change packages, where you request additional funding for specific purposes. We did submit a couple of those. They were all rejected. So our budget is what our budget is right now. So that was approved by, that passed through the legislature, and that's what our budget is. Unfortunately, and this is an argument that we made to them to no avail throughout the process, that using a 2018 data to determine our current needs is not necessarily appropriate for an agency like us, simply because we are continuously growing. Just by the nature of the agency, we're growing at an average of 3 or 4 schools a year. And it also, for reasons that I'm not going to get into, did not take into account our future procurement needs. And I'll talk about this a little bit in a second. This was due to some administrative sort of snafus that at the time the budget agency acknowledged and said that they would help us work through. And that's the renewal of our content management system, which costs roughly $50,000, $60,000 a year. It expires at the end of 21. And so that was something else that was not taken into consideration when they adjusted our budget. So another point I want to make is that our current appropriation, the 522, which is what it's at now, represents the bare minimum that our agency needs to cover hard and fixed costs, to cover our hard and fixed costs as they were in 2018, necessary to fulfill our statutory duties. So in other words, we have no soft costs or very, very, very minimal costs, which brings us to the second part of why I'm even bringing this up, is the 15% reversion that in May, the state budget director issued a memo requiring all agencies to revert 15% of their general fund. It's normally 2%. So this is a significant increase. And because we have so few soft or variable costs, which are things like conferences, memberships, subscriptions, meal expenses, travel, like unnecessary travel expenses, because we have almost none of that, our revised spending plan essentially consisted entirely of temporarily reallocating our hard and fixed costs, like salaries, rent, necessary software expenses. So unlike some agencies, there wasn't much fat to trim in our reversion plan. Our reversion plan was submitted like a week ago and is not due to be reviewed until next Monday. So we don't know how state budget agency is going to react to it. Which brings us to the second sort of source of income. We've also historically maintained a dedicated fund. This was set up, I don't know, back in 2014 or 13, maybe 15, for our administrative fees. Because we'd received an appropriation since the beginning, our board, you all, your predecessors, have reduced our administrative fee from the maximum, which is 3%, down to 0.5%, which is where it's been since 2017. The purpose of which being that because we had an appropriation, we wanted to give schools who are already significantly underfunded the ability to drive as much funding into the classroom as possible. And we couldn't justify just accumulating funding. However, we didn't want to reduce it to 0 because, again, we depend on an appropriation, and at any time the appropriation could change, and we wanted to make sure we had a rainy day fund. Thank goodness we did that, because we've spent very little out of our dedicated fund, and that is what is allowing us to even make to adjust based on our 45% budget reduction in the last year, where what we would have to have done without it is literally cut salaries. I would have had to either cut salaries or cut staff. And as you know, we're pretty lean staff-wise. Prior to the pandemic, prior to the pandemic, we estimate that our admin fee brings in around $200,000 a year, which obviously is not enough in and of itself for operations. Unfortunately, now we're estimating that our current admin fee revenue could be as low as $170,000 to $185,000 due to enrollment uncertainty and reduced funding, which again I will discuss in a moment, related to the definition of virtual funding, which is a big deal. So that is that's the playing field that we're operating under right now. There's a lot of uncertainty because the budget agency has not officially ruled or done whatever it is they're going to do with our reversion plan. Critical needs, which we think we are okay with now, but may or may not be okay with past fiscal year 2021, include really two things. One is staffing. I went back and looked right before this meeting, and while the number of staff has varied from 2 to 4 over the life of the agency, essentially it's been static. To put things into perspective, in the 2013-14 school year, we had 3 full-time staff members. They oversaw 8 schools. In the 2019-2020 school year, we still have 3 full-time staff members. We now are responsible for 29 schools across the state. And in addition to those, we have 4 more schools approved and expected to open in the next 2 years, and have averaged approving or activating approximately 3 to 4 new charters a year since 2016. So in other words, we're continuing to grow. The problem is this increased workload on staff. Our evaluation, monitoring, and accountability responsibilities increase each time the portfolio grows, but it doesn't show up as a new expenditure in the budget because salaries are static. Existing staff just absorbs the additional work and responsibility. But I believe that we've reached pretty much the limit of our capacity to effectively manage our portfolio, which is the reason we hired Jamie Brady. One of the reasons we hired Jamie Brady, back in 2018, was to relieve some of this pressure. And unfortunately, she left us right before, in November of 2019, so right before all the stuff hit the fan. And we were deep in the process of replacing her. Job had been posted for months, had gone through probably 60, 70 resumes, narrowed it down. We're going through starting to go through the interview process. When the pandemic hit, they froze all hiring and deleted all open job requests. So even though if we had hired somebody the week before the pandemic hit, we would have been fine. But because we had not hired somebody when the time the pandemic hit, they basically deleted our open job position. So we're stuck with 3 people at this time. It is critical that we fill this position. And I made that very clear in our reversion plan, that there's a point at which you can ask agencies to cut costs, but there's a point at which you start to detrimentally impact the agency's ability to fulfill its statutory ability or statutory responsibilities. So the second issue is the renewal of our data and content management system, which is called Epicenter. Some of you may be familiar with it. We use it for everything. It significantly reduces the amount of time staff spends on administrative tasks. We use it for application submission and evaluation, reporting, monitoring, and internal document management. If we were unable to renew this, the agency would be crippled. We literally would not be able to do our jobs. We don't have the resources to move the services to another platform. We actually priced it out to IoT, which is the state information technology agency, and they basically quoted us a higher price for fewer services. So those are the 2 big sort of outstanding concerns for us as we move into this next budget session. Obviously, we have no idea what's going to happen in the budget session. I am not expecting our appropriation to increase. I am, in fact, expecting it I expect that it is likely to decrease, which is why we are recommending a reevaluation of our admin fee. What has always been the plan is that the expectation is that if we were going to have a reduction in our general fund appropriation, that it would occur over time. It would ramp down, giving us time to ramp up our admin fee increase, because even with a 0.25% increase, we have significant concerns, given the razor-thin margins that schools are operating, and also the increased costs of this year. And again, we'll talk about that in a second, that it could cause significant financial hardship, if not closure, of some of our schools. So what we are proposing to do is covering existing costs under what exists in our dedicated fund now, and then waiting to raise the admin fee until next year. So not starting July of 2020 to 21, but starting in July of 21. And we think we can cover costs. But just to give you an idea, the costs that are temporarily being moved into our general fund, we estimate it's going to take 12 to 18 months before existing cash flow will offset those expenses at 75%. And this is assuming at 0.75%. And this is assuming that we don't have a significant reduction in admin fees due to other factors. So there's a lot of balls in play here. We are currently, obviously working with schools on the, how best to structure their programs. I may actually, I'm hesitant to skip too far ahead because I think the discussion of the funding is critical to the discussion of our fall considerations for our schools. So I don't want to jump there yet. And I think at this point, if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. That's just a basic snapshot of where we are today, which is unique and is a confluence of very bad luck and bad events, et cetera, et cetera. We're going to work through it. And it will mean we need to raise our admin fee. It has always been our position that one of the reasons that ICSB received an appropriation in the first place was to give us the ability to minimize our admin fee. Ball State charges 3%, Trine charges 3%. I think most of the others charge 3%. The mayor's office only charges, I don't know if it's 0.5% or 1% now, but I know that they're going to have to raise their admin fee as well. And so I'm not poo-pooing the idea of, and that's the legal term, of raising our admin fee. I know it's necessary, but I want to do it in a thoughtful way that does not essentially destroy our schools financially. So that is my update on the current state of the agency, and I'm happy to take any questions. I want to say one last thing. Our staff has been busting their butts over the last 3 months. I have worked more hours at home virtually by a magnitude than I did. I work, I work the hours I'm supposed to work, and they're almost always over the 37.5 I'm supposed to work. But this last 3 months has been beyond the pale. It has been constant. And I know that I worry about staff morale, staff mental health, because everyone's dealing with the quarantine as well, correct? And still has to deal with all of this stuff. And so, for me as an executive director, I can't just ignore and keep piling things on top of staff and expecting them to function the way that they're normally going to function without eventually cracking. And so that is my biggest worry as an executive director right now. And the staffing and the re-upping of the contract that allows us to minimize the amount of busy work that staff does are critical to our continued existence. And I'm going to argue that until I'm blue in the face with our state budget folks and with the governor's office and with legislators, so that we don't find ourselves in a situation where they're expecting us to continue with 3 staff members and 35 schools, because it is simply not possible for us to function that way. So I'm being pretty honest here, but these are interesting times. And this is in the context of us having to now potentially monitor a half a dozen different educational models, right? That we had gotten used to the way our schools had operated, and the majority of them are going to be unable to operate in the same way, at least for this next year. And that adds additional burden as we try to figure this out. So I do not want to, by any stretch of the imagination, make this a whine. I'm not whining. We're going to do our jobs. We're going to work as hard as we have to, and as long as we have to, because it's what's best for the kids and what's best for the schools. But I thought it was important that you know how hard staff has been working and sort of the circumstances under which we find ourselves. So if there are no questions and the chair thinks we have enough to move on to the PLA, I am happy to, but chair's call.
Thanks, James. And I know we're going to revisit a couple of these issues later as we've got deeper conversation to have on the admin fee and more. So thanks for that. I know we just did have another call-in user join, and I want to confirm whether that's Gretchen, just so we know whether she has joined us.
Is that the 6445 at the end?
Well, it shows up as call-in user 4, but I think that's not Gretchen, correct?
No, this is Jamie Vanderwall with IPS, and my computer was acting up, so I had to switch to phone. I
No
apologize.
problem, Jamie. Just making sure we're trying to keep track virtually of our board members. So it is 1:30, so I think we should go ahead. We've given, I think, ample time for folks to join, and hopefully Gretchen will still be able to join us today. But I think first matter of business would be to go ahead and look at the minutes from our last meeting. Does anyone have any comments or questions, any discussion on the minutes from last time? Hearing none, I would entertain a motion to approve those minutes.
Accept the minutes.
Second.
Great, then by voice vote, please confirm. Calvin?
Yes.
Dylan?
Yes.
Goff?
Yes.
Kramer?
Yes.
Ruger?
Yes.
Marianne?
Yes.
Right. Thank you, ma'am. Rummel?
Yes.
And Preston, yes. And just to verify, Gutman, are you on the line? No. Okay, so moving forward, that's vote for yes for the minutes from last meeting. Thank you. And then I think, James, we can move ahead to the PLA.
Okay, PLA. This is a proposal for an activation of a charter for a participating, a charter for an existing school, Lewis B. Russell Jr. School 48, located on Central, that to activate a charter for Phelan to enable it to enter into a participating innovation network charter school agreement with IPS to operate the school as a restart. This is, I think, slightly different for the board than the previous two schools that we've approved as participating innovation network charter schools, 93 and 103. The primary difference is that Phelan had been operating those schools for a while and was just converting them. In this case, and correct me if I'm wrong, Earl, this is a completely new relationship. And so he was approved to come in, and this will be his first year. So it's different in the sense that academic data for PLA 48 in the past is irrelevant, really. I mean, IPS decided that it was a restart and then it needed to be, that some change needed to happen there. And as you can see from the recommendation that we provided, IPS had, and I'm not sure if we included this in prior recommendations, but I learned a little bit more about the IPS process this time. They have a very rigorous process for determining, whether or not this decision should be made. Obviously, there's a lot of public sentiment on the issue. And as you can see in the beginning of the discussion, I mean, they had multiple family and community meetings and multiple conversations at their public board meetings about whether or not this was the right path to take before they approved the contract in March 19th of 2020. Again, as I said, you can look at the data, how PLA has performed at 103 and at 93 in the recommendation. I'm not going to repeat the data here. I think the main point is that IPS, after careful consideration, selected Phelan as the operator, which to me, as an authorizer at this point, having no data to go on, for the particular school, pretty much says it all. I mean, in this case, our job would begin the minute he takes the school over, right? Is he turning it around? Are we getting the same results that we're getting from 93 and 103? So again, a lot of the rest of the items that are in the recommendation are fairly similar. The financial health and systems data has obviously changed, you can read the numbers there. We don't really have any concerns. 48, has had declining enrollment, but that is most likely a function of the school's performance. And it ranged from 353 to 290. Enrollment's always a concern when you have a situation like this. Their proposed enrollment's like right in the middle there. It's reasonable, given the fact that it is an operating school with an existing location. Let's see if there's anything else. I mean, we really don't have any concerns with this proposal other than the concerns we have for all schools that are opening in the fall in light of the pandemic. So with that, we have a number of folks from Phelan here, and I don't know which you all can decide amongst yourselves who wants to speak. I believe we also have Jamie from IPS here. Again, Kim, it's your discretion as to whether or not she can make a comment about the process. But with that, I will turn it over to Phelan.
Sounds great.
Sorry, wait, Earl, one more thing. The public hearing, we had one attendee who simply wanted to observe the process and made no comment. We've received no other public comment except for a letter of support from IPS.
Well, thank you, James, and thanks, Charter School Board, for taking the time to learn a little bit more about kind of where we stand, PLA stands. We have a board member with us, Chris Kimberly, so if you have any questions, we have our regional director, Nicole Fama, and we have our national chief financial officer, Ida, online as well, so any questions are welcome. Just a short version to go back, we're a nonprofit. Started in 2013, really with the goal of giving children the quality of education that they deserve. We've been blessed to partner with, as James said, IPS at schools 103 and schools 93. The cultures, candidly, there before the partnerships were not very good for children, and now they're loving, they're supportive, they're warm, they're welcoming. You see that in the parent response, as James mentioned. Enrollment at both campuses has gone up by nearly 100 scholars at each campus. And you see that in the growth piece, which is because of the academic growth that our scholars have demonstrated. Obviously, there was a blip with change in tests, but given the academic growth our scholars have demonstrated, all of our schools in Indianapolis are A-rated. The use of a charter at School 48, we're so excited to be partnering with IPS, Jamie and her team, Dr. Johnson. The reason that we want to use the charter is the same one when we discussed at 93. It allows us to have more line of sight into the funding stability that the scholars will have. And I think the reason that our schools have grown in enrollment, improved their culture, and grown in terms of academic piece is because we did have the adequate resources to make sure that all the elements of our model were implemented, and that's resulted in success for our scholars. We have our whole leadership team. They're all ready to go, and we're so very excited about that. We're at 96% staffing for the campus, and we're already having more meet and greets with families, and hopefully we usually do an ice cream social or a picnic. So if we can't do that, we're trying to brainstorm how we can do something to continue to stay connected with our scholars and families as we get ready for the fall. So thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for considering our request.
And,
You're welcome.
And Jamie, if you'd like to say a few words, we'd love to hear from you.
Support overall. Obviously, for partnering with Phelan Leadership Academies, we've been doing so since 2015, which is the beginning of innovation. They're our longest standing innovation partner. And so as James was speaking to you before, we ran a really robust process that started in the fall when we did our school quality review at Lewis B. Russell School 48. That school had persistently struggling grades, have had up to 6 Fs in terms of the state accountability framework, and we just recognized that while good things were happening in the school, it did need some pretty major changes. And so that was what led the administration to recommend to our board that we do an innovation restart at that school. The restart was approved in February this year, and then we formally matched and selected Phelan Leadership Academies to the school, presented that to our board in March, and they voted on that on March 19th. And so since that time, we've just been in process of logistically, transferring things over in the school, even during this very difficult time during COVID. You can imagine transitioning a school when none of us can be in person and students aren't there is particularly difficult. But Earl and his team have been really great working with us and trying to find creative solutions to all of those challenges. What led us to select the Phelan leadership team for this particular restart is, as you all have seen, their track record at both Francis Scott Key School 103 and George Fisher School 93. And I talked briefly about that in the letter, but we've seen a lot of positive changes at both of those schools since Phelan has been in management of them. 103 was our first restart. We had no roadmap for how to do it, and it was arguably one of the most violent schools for students within IPS. The violent incident rate for children there between the grades, K and 6 was as high as some of our high schools. If you go in that school today, it is a warm, welcoming, wonderful place for students. And so they have truly turned the tide in terms of school culture and then begun to see the academic achievements that will follow on after that happens. School 93 has persistently been in our top 5 performers across the district in terms of growth since Phelan has been partnering to run that school as well. And seeing a lot of proficiency gains. So just given our consistent relationship with the organization, what we've seen them do for students in those 2 locations, we felt confident that having them as our partner at School 48 was the right thing to do for those students and those families and support them using a charter in order to do so.
Great, thanks, Jamie. I think staff, you did a great job preparing your recommendation for us today. I think we got a thorough look at your recommendation, and we already familiarity with Phelan and appreciate IPS's support. I guess I'd like to open it up to board members, see if anyone has questions for members of the Phelan team or for IPS. Okay, then I would entertain a motion to approve the charter request.
I move that we.
Excuse me.
I
I have
sorry.
questions.
I hear Marianne. You're delayed a little bit, Marianne.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I do have questions. I don't think that they're lengthy at all. And I'm mainly asking them because they're the kind of questions that I know parents will ask me later. So I'd like to ask them now. If we were to say no, Mr. Phelan, would you still operate this as a non-charter innovation school? If the answer were to be no today, would you still then go ahead and have the contract with IPS and operate as an innovation only? I'm presuming that you would.
Yes, we would.
Okay, thank you. And then my other question is, I know parents in that neighborhood, because this was frightening to them when things changed, were concerned about whether administration or favorite teachers would carry over. You're now to the point in the year where I'm assuming you've done hiring. Can you, without mentioning specific names, of course, can you tell us to what degree former administration or teachers are going to continue? I know that there were some that people really liked.
Yeah, I think in the preschool there'll be very high levels of retention. In the administration, there will not be. The leaders decided to go to school. Well, I don't know, Jamie, if I'm okay to say. what school he's elected to go to, but he's gone to another IPS campus, and he recruited a lot of the existing staff. And unfortunately, the vote happened on the 19th, and the usual process we had to really get to know staff and get to introduce them to PLA and answer fears about actually their pay would have gone up and their benefits would have probably stayed right about the same, and the culture and climate. So we didn't have a chance to talk to staff. So the short answer is preschool will stay the same. Administration in the school will have a higher rate of transition.
Which IPS operates?
IPS does operate the preschool program.
And is that's the developmental preschool? Is there a regular pre-K?
I don't believe there's a regular pre-K. It's a developmental one.
Okay. And I know parents did like the developmental preschool very much.
It
On that topic, so in the past, I think I saw somewhere in my materials, and I had a power outage, so I couldn't print some things out this morning. If I remember right, I think that School 48 had 25% of the students were special education students. I know I'm 93 and 103, no, I think if I remember right, your other elementary schools, not high school, are under 10% on special education. Do you, from what you're seeing of enrollment right now, do you expect to still be at 25%, or is it going to be lower? And why or why not? That's the other issue parents were really concerned about.
We expect it to be the same. At 103, when we first went there, they were 18 to 20% special needs. The district elected to move the program. They had I think a self-contained piece at the school. That's the reason that 103 had the drop that it did, because IPS elected to move and consolidate the campus. And again, Jamie maybe can speak to that more than I can, but we expect the number to stay the exact same at 48.
Okay. And then I think this is my last question for you. When you were at our board meeting in December, you probably remember that a question that I asked you about was at your governance level. And I'm assuming it's still the same board that's over this school as well at Phelan.
That's correct.
And I remember you were telling me that although your board only has maybe 4 or 5 meetings a year, that you do a lot of work at the board committee level. And I think you and I both realized that maybe public meetings laws weren't being followed at that level. I know that James had planned to be working with you to help to strengthen that. What kind of changes have been made at the board committee level? As in, are you giving notice publicly? Are you publishing minutes?
We had violated no committee or open door laws prior to and or since then. What I had said, and maybe it was a slip of tongue, when one individual board member met with another to give advice or counsel, that was not a meeting of the board or an official committee meeting. So I probably shouldn't have referred to it as a committee meeting. But we continue to provide open door notice for both our governing board, which meets quarterly, as you mentioned, and now we've begun to actively provide open door even for the smaller meetings that are not meetings, but smaller meetings.
Okay. And I would encourage you to post those on your website, especially right now during the pandemic, since, I mean, we really can't get into the schools. I'm not sure where they get posted. And you are not alone in me asking these questions. I ask these questions of a lot of schools, including public, charter, private, all of them. Thank you. I think that's all my questions.
You're welcome, Mary.
And does any other board member have questions? Okay. Hearing none, I would entertain a motion to move forward with the approval of the charter activation.
Yeah, so I'll move that the board approve PLA's request to activate a charter for PLA at 48.
Second.
Great. Calvin?
Second. Motion.
Can you just verify your vote?
Oh, my vote. Oh, of course. Yes.
Dylan?
Yes.
Goff?
Yeah.
Pringer?
Yes.
Ruger?
No.
Rummel,
Yes.
and Preston, yes. Motion passes. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Congrats, Earl.
Thank you so much.
And team.
James, should we dismiss ourselves now?
You can stick around for the fun or you can take off. It's up to you.
Thank you. Take care.
All right, bye, guys.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Um,
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Stay safe.
Okay,
All right,
Nikki.
James and staff, it's all yours.
Okay, Nikki, do you, I saw all the emails, but I was not keeping track of who has to leave when. So what are we looking at in terms of timing? Because I know it's already 1:50 and we have to get to some action items. So
We have one departure at 2:30, I believe, and then a couple hard stops at 3. But Gretchen hasn't joined, and she was one of those. So
okay, so what I'm gonna, with your permission, I'm gonna actually, Bridget, if you wouldn't mind doing a quick end of the year observations as leading into considerations for fall, because I think that's gonna tee off the amendment flexibility request.
Sure.
So Bridget's going to talk a little bit about our end of the year observations for this past year.
As you know, we collected all of the continuous learning plans from all of our schools as they were submitted to Department of Ed. And we continued to monitor and provide technical support throughout March through the end of their school year. At the end of the year, we did ask them to complete an end of year report. And I have kind of a high level summary of all of the information that we gleaned from those end of year reports. And we just kind of wanted to give you that information. As we expected, just because of how quickly everyone had to pivot to online and virtual, assignment completion and attendance rates just varied across all of the schools and by grade level. Each school was able to define how they collected and tracked attendance, so that, kind of was a root cause in that. Examples of how they completed assignments and collection of attendance were through Zoom sessions, pre-designed tracking systems, like maybe they just had each morning to go in and submit an attendance button, or teachers and staff made phone calls, or they had to text teachers. And then some just, it was simply completion of assignments was also a tracking method. We also looked at communication to families, and that varied school to school as well. It included Zoom, emails, phone calls, through website, text message, social media outlets. Some were using FaceTime, just so they had kind of like what we're doing now, that face-to-face interaction. So especially students could, in the younger grades, could see their teachers. And then also a lot of them use that meal pickup and drop off for packets and other times to be able to engage with their students and family. And we also made sure to address special education and ELL services, and to make sure there was continuity of services. And they were very specific that they continued to provide resources as aligned to IEPs and ILPs accordingly. Some of the lessons learned and primary barriers that came across in all of the end of year reporting was obviously access to technology, just ability of families to get to the school to pick up meals, especially with mass transportation being shut down, and reliable Wi-Fi. The difficulty in terms of grade span, like some of our schools are K2 or K3, and those students understanding how to use distance learning, e-learning versus 7th or 8th graders. When this was a quick pivot, they had not been used to that, so that was a barrier. And some families not having school supplies at home, that they were all provided for them at school, so that was an initial barrier. adult high schools, since we have almost half our portfolio are Excel centers. Those adults obviously had to take care of their own children and families. So that became a challenge in and of itself. And just the sharing of all the resources within a home. So whether or not there was one phone that maybe had Wi-Fi access, everyone within that home had to use that one device. And we also asked what some of the concerns were as re-entry, reopening for the fall, and the continuation of e-learning for their students, how to adapt. What is that continued communication and what does it look like? Making sure that we do move to more of a one-to-one device and where the funding comes from, and getting hotspots for all of their students and families. Continual professional development for staff, families, and students. And a big underlying concern is social and emotional learning and taking care of both students as they return and then staff as well, especially since we've now been off since March, and being able to help everyone as they return. And just the continual outreach and relationship building across the community, and to make sure that they're able to build consistent information, structures, and continuity of learning continues with all of their students. So again, I know that's very high level, but that kind of sets us up, as James said, moving into what we will be doing as staff for the 2020-2021 school year.
So I'm going to move, given that we're going to lose Dr. Calvin in about maybe 20, 25 minutes, 30 minutes, I'm going to really quickly run through fall considerations. I didn't know what to call this, but there's been a lot of moving parts in the last couple of days. As a matter of fact, there's a press conference, the governor's press conference at 2:30, I think. I've heard may address K-12 funding. I don't know what that means. But to lay the groundwork, basically, per the governor's standing executive order, schools open July 1. That's it. There's no more guidance. And then I'm going to skip from the funding part to then the other part, the health and safety part, because the funding part really is what's going to drive a lot of the decisions our schools make. Last day, Superintendent McCormick released a memo entitled Guidance on Reporting Virtual Students on Membership. It said that, and I'm going to sort of quote this because it's important that you get what DOE's actual words were, that IDOE will be adding a virtual due to COVID option for schools to use in reporting the virtual status of their students. Students who receive 50% or more of their instructional programming provided through virtual learning due to COVID will be reported as virtual due to COVID and will be funded at 100% of foundation. Now, on the next page, in an FAQ section, they say that this isn't the final word on the subject. They essentially admit that they don't have the authority to do this. So the problem is that you have this big, bold word saying you're going to get 100% for virtual students funded for COVID, and then they say, but maybe not afterwards. And I think the superintendent walked back a little bit in her webinar yesterday. I have been doing my damnedest to try to figure out whether or not this is accurate, what's going to happen, because that's obviously a really big deal. Today, as of pre-2:30, the DOE's statement has not been confirmed or denied by the General Assembly or the Governor's Office. Our current position is, assuming that it is not confirmed by the legislature in some way, we will be advising our schools to ignore this guidance, because it is better to plan for 85% funding and get 100% funding than to plan for 100% funding, and then when the legislature convenes in January, suddenly DOE is forced to take all that funding away from you, right? So if DOE adopts this method and starts giving schools 100% funding, and the legislature decides in March that that's not accurate, because the current law says it isn't, that that's a much worse outcome. Just the other little nuance to this is a change that was made in the 2019 budget. And again, I don't want to get in the weeds too much, but again, it's critical to the way schools are thinking about this. The 2019 budget changed the way that charter schools, virtual charter schools, are funded. It actually changed the way all virtual schools are funded. In prior years, you were a virtual charter school or you were not a virtual charter school. If 51% of your instruction was delivered virtually, all of your students received 85% of foundation. If they weren't, if 49% of your schools your students were virtual, you received 100% of foundation. In 2019, they changed it to an individual per student ADM calculation. What that mouthful means is that each individual student is measured instead of the school's overall virtual education percentage. So if you have a school that has 100 students, and this is a school corporation or a charter school, and 99 of those students are full brick and mortar, one of those students is full virtual, you will get 85% of foundation for that one student. That, again, changes things, right? So if you're a school and you're trying to plan for COVID, and you were assuming that all you had to do was to make sure that 51% of overall instruction was not virtual to get 100% funding, you're wrong now, right? You have to measure that for each student. So that really threw a wrench. If that is indeed the case, if the DOE guidance is indeed not supported by the legislature, that is going to significantly impact the way schools plan and remove a lot of options. Like for example, we did a really quick survey. You know, our schools obviously don't have their plans in place right now. Like a lot of them are tentative, they haven't been approved by the board, but common themes have been alternating or rotating days where students come for in-person instruction on certain days and receive virtual instruction on other days. Schools are adapting by either implementing shorter days and longer years or longer days to account for the days that the students are missing. And this is really most likely where most of our schools are going to land if we stick with the virtual funding as it is today, right? They are going to try to ensure that all of their students receive at least 51% brick and mortar instruction. The irony is that pure virtual instruction, in some cases, may be the safest and most economical and only affordable option for some schools. But pure virtual instruction will clearly result in a 15% reduction in funding for schools. And for some schools, that's not doable. So again, this is how this rule may or may not impact decisions that schools make. There are also another concept that's very popular are parallel tracks, where you have a brick and mortar track, fully brick and mortar and fully virtual, and you let the parents decide which. Now again, in this case, the purely virtual track is going to get 85% funding. So you have to account for that. If you have a hybrid, and some schools are thinking parallel virtual, but you can move between the two, then you're going to have to additionally track which students are moving when and how much they're virtual and how much they're not virtual, because your funding, whether it's 100 or 85%, will depend on that specific student's schedule, like whether the parent decides to send them, you know, for 50% or less. And then some are working, very few that I've heard are planning on full brick and mortar instruction, using existing or modified space and implementing social distancing measures. That's primarily because of cost, which brings us to the DOE guidance in class, which was a 38-page document released by DOE on the 5th, which was less guidance than a exhaustive list of the steps schools may take to produce a safe and healthy environment. The problem is it's clarified, it's only a guide, instructs schools to consult with their lawyers, local health departments, relevant stakeholders, and legal counsel in order to actually make decisions, in order to determine which of them are feasible and appropriate. In other words, nothing is mandated. DOE is not requiring plans and will not monitor plans. DOE is sort of wiping their hands of all liability for this document. Adapting the some or even all of these procedures is maybe impossible for schools. And I've been on a number of Zoom calls and webinars recently where schools have discussed how expensive this is. And the funny thing is that, you know, you think big term, like, oh, we have to modify all these policies and procedures. But what's really like adding up are the small things, like hydration. You can't have water fountains. You can't have bottle fillers. It's recommended you don't allow water bottles from home. So what do? Right? So one school has said that they're going to plan on using Dixie cups. Their system has 1,200 students. They anticipate going through 1,500 Dixie cups a day for a full school year. How much does that cost? Masks, very similarly. Disposable masks. Schools are, IDOE said in their webinar yesterday, they're going to make 2 million masks available. Well, one school leader estimated that their school alone would need over 200,000 disposable masks for the school year. So literally IDOE is saying we're going to make 10%, you know, we can give masks to 10 schools, right? The lowest price this person was able to find disposable masks, 31 cents a mask. So that's $80,000 or something just for masks. Temperature checks, who performs? Where are they performed? When are they performed? What happens when a student tests over the recommended temperature? Cleaning, expenses. Who's performing this? When? How often? How often do you clean common areas? What do you do with gyms? Recess space? Backpacks. You're not supposed to allow home to school transfers. Are students not supposed to bring backpacks? How do they transfer homework? Or are you simply sterilizing backpacks every morning on entry? Again, who's doing this? Is it extra staff? Is it existing staff? How much of the day are you cutting into sterilization procedures? Same thing with lockers and other things like that. This is literally only a sampling. I mean, this is like a minor sampling of all the things that were suggested in that memo. And as a school leader, you're thinking, am I liable if I don't do all of this stuff? What happens if I do half of it or a little of it because I can't afford to? And a staff member or student gets COVID? What happens if a student refuses to wear a mask? You know, as we know, masks protect everyone else, not you. So you could have 19 students in a classroom wearing a mask. One student rips their mask off and runs around the classroom, and all of those persons are at risk of infection. So again, these are the things that are the practical items, and we're not even talking about education right now. But these are the practical items that school leaders are terrified about. They're worried about, particularly in light of the funding. So I wanted to give you just like a little background. Oh, sorry, one more thing. And then we'll get to the actual action item. The wild card here are the families themselves. Several schools have issued surveys, and they plan on continuing doing these during the summer. And one of the questions they ask is, how comfortable are you in returning to school in the fall? Now, keep in mind, this is June. And at least one of our schools found that 70% of parents, and more importantly, 80% of staff were not comfortable returning to a brick and mortar environment in the fall right now. Now, these numbers go up or down depending on what happens in the next 2 months. But that is extremely concerning, right? I mean, obviously, what your parents want will, to a certain extent, dictate what educational model you settle on. But if 80% of your teachers don't want to come to school, that's a much harder role to fill, or that's a much harder thing to account for. And we've constantly heard about how difficult it's going to be to find subs. I mean, there are older teachers, and we've heard this, who are retiring in droves rather than face going back to being exposed to COVID. So there's going to be a serious dearth of options in terms of teaching staff. So the schools have really not said anything about Well, some schools have that we've talked to. I mean, the issue is this is a reminder that this is a very fluid situation. And in many cases, the model that a school ends up with could change 3 times between now and the time they actually open, depending on what the legislature does, depending on what their families are feeling in July and in August. And honestly, this is not even with us talking about how we're going to successfully monitor these different applications. Okay, so what we're mindful of the fact that Dr. McAlvin has to leave in like 10 minutes. I want to move really quickly to our actual request, one of our action items, because it is the most important one, I think, and that's the recommendation for flexibility to approve amendments. As I've said, I listed some of the different concepts that schools are having, are proposing to us now, like tentatively, and I suspect that these will change. And as I said, I also suspect that they may change. They may submit a request and then submit another request, depending on the situation. And right now, the way that our board procedures are, and you can read it from the memo or draft, that there are certain things that require to be brought to the board for formal approval. And given the circumstances, it's just not feasible for us to do this. We literally would probably have to schedule at least 1 meeting a week, if not 2 meetings a week, to handle all of the amendment requests. And I don't want to speak for you as board members. If that is what you want to do, then that is what we will do. We will get those meetings on the regular, and we will bring amendment requests to you as they come to us. We are in the process of formalizing at least a first request, like a first request. In other words, you have to submit a plan to us that is your initial plan, right? And I almost guarantee that the majority of these plans are going to represent material changes in some form of educational design, mission, philosophy, program, or relationships with service providers, which are all things that require formal board approval. So what we're asking for is to allow staff, specifically me, to make the final call on these amendment requests. And we describe in there a little bit about how much time we've spent and been immersed in this in the last 3 months. In terms of best practices and different models of school leaders and other authorizers and all of this, and feel that, honestly, that given these circumstances, we're in the best position to make these calls, and honestly would be fully accountable to whatever happens. I want to emphasize that, one of the advantages of having the board weigh in on these kinds of things is that accountability is shared. But I fully acknowledge that if I approve a plan and it is a disaster, that I am the one who is accountable for approving that plan. And I accept that risk, right? I mean, it's the only way that I think our schools are going to be able to actually function in the fall, given all the uncertainty. And as I said, we could get an announcement in 15 minutes from the governor's office and the legislature that we're going to be funded 100%, which completely changes the game, right? And, I don't know that we're going to get that, but if we do, great. And, we may see COVID cases just continue to decline and flatline and go nowhere between now and August, and that changes the game. We just don't know. The main point is we just need to allow our schools to have flexibility. So that's our recommendation. I welcome questions from board members on the topic. Again, knowing that Dr. Calvin has to leave in about 10 minutes. So I wanted to get that out there before she had to go. So happy to take any questions.
I don't think I have any questions. I mean, we had a chance to talk about this, and as a parent, looking forward to the next year. I really appreciate the position in some ways, though I can't fully appreciate the position schools are in with the uncertainty, and recognizing that, we may even go back to school and then it changes a few weeks later. And it doesn't seem feasible that we would be available to respond to every single request as a board to adjust any sort of work that they might be doing or anything that would need approval. So I think what you're offering makes sense, but I'd love to open the floor for other questions.
I just wanted to make sure I understood you to say that all schools will open July the 1st, yes or no?
The governor, right now, schools are closed per governor's executive order. Like you are technically not allowed to open your school for any academic or sports or anything. Per the standing executive order, that ends July 1, which means that not that the school is going to open its doors on July 1, but they can open their doors starting July 1. So like if you were going to bring your teachers in for PD or have sports practices or whatever, that restriction ends July 1. Schools are all still planning their own schedules, right? So it'll be throughout August, and most likely most of them will be throughout August. Although I understand some may want to open as early as July in order to make up for, honestly, to make sure that they have enough time to get the 51% of kids in a brick and mortar setting to the extent that they can because of the funding issue.
I understand as a grandmother the confusion because I have 2 grandchildren that I'm worried to death about going back to school. But I do like the idea, James, of at least there's a plan in place and that you're willing to take on that responsibility. But in a case like this, unknown territory, as a board member, I most certainly can support you if you make one little mistake, because it is not necessarily just one. Yes, one. It's not just necessarily that the charter board, the executive director is responsible. We all are. And we all are grasping with the most common sense way of opening this up for parents that are fearful, especially like me. And all we need is to have one school that's infested with an epidemic of some kind. And I think you've put together a good plan that can ease the mind of some parents. At least we've thought about it, the ifs, the and I do trust the judgment of the staff. Questions? I have no questions on putting together such a plan because it is mind-boggling for you as well as schools. I have a 9-year-old grandson getting ready to go back, and I'm scared to death. I don't expect him to not run and hit and get up in another kid's face, but I'm going to do my best to work with him virtually.
Yeah.
I have no other comments.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. I am generally sympathetic and in agreement with what you're asking for, because it would be impossible. There's a change, and I know it needs to move quickly. So I agree with most of this. My only concern or question would come in, where are the boundaries of where your authority ends? And for instance, if they're changing something just to get this done, virtual, real, whatever, I'm fine. They've got to just go with it. It's very difficult. As I see the list in the memo, which is well put together, and it lists the reasons why charter amendments are required, the numbered list of 1 through 5.
Yeah.
Are we giving you authority for any of those 5? Or is that or not? And the one that catches my eye, which I can't imagine that you're including, but I'd want to make sure that we're clear about this. Number 3 is a charter amendment for relocation of the school if the revision results in relocation to another school district or geographic area, which that would be a hard stop without a public meeting.
Well, so yes, right. So here's that is the one I'm least concerned about. It is in there because we've had issues with it and it was on the list, right? That's the whole list of things that we need. I didn't cherry pick. That's the whole list of things that need to be approved by the board. It didn't make sense to exclude that one just because, again, relocation has been a thorn in our side because no one knows what geographic area means. It can mean, does it mean the next neighborhood? Some neighborhoods are right next to each other. Some neighborhoods are not. Does it mean the east side of the city versus the near east side of the city versus the far east side of the city versus the west side of the city? Like some of them are easier to answer. Like if you're moving from the far west to the far east, yeah, that seems like a change in geographic area. But we were getting questions from schools, and this is mostly new schools. This came up in the new school context of, well, what about we move here? And it's like on the boundary. It's like, well, I don't know. I mean, is that a new geographic area or not? Now, obviously, the thing that I think the intent was, and even honestly, and I know you don't approve of this, but like even moving from one school district to another can just mean crossing the street, right? I mean, there is a boundary line that is a street. And on one side of the street, you have one school district, and on the other side of the street, you have another. And does it fundamentally impact? I mean, is there that much of a fundamental impact other than where we hold the public hearing?
Well, now there is a big fundamental impact, though, because when the school was approved, the school district in which it's in has to receive notice and
Right.
has the right to come and either support or deny, and it's publicized there, where in the other one it wasn't. And then now, because of the legislative change in the last session, now we have the very real possibility that when a public school district proposes a referendum, that a charter school located geographically within their district has a more of a right than they did before to ask for a percentage of those. So what I'm saying is, I think that if we gave you full authority, including that,
I mean, I can assure you it's not going to happen.
I would like to carve out just that piece for the special authorization. And I think the rest of it, I can see really good reasons to give it to you. So I would like to carve that out of the motion, everything but that item. And then I would like to also say that whatever changes are made, I mean, I think that you post the charter agreements all the time on the website anyway.
Yeah.
So the amendments actually would be public because they would be on the website, right?
We can, make the avail. I don't know if we post the charter agreements on the website because they're all identical.
Mm-hmm.
They literally are just like the whatever the default agreement that is on our website. There are no changes to them.
Because
I don't think it's on there.
They're kind of incorporating the application more or less, probably, aren't they?
Yeah, the application is what matters.
Results are.
Right, and the application is available, yes. So,
so my main issues are changing to another school district. That's something the board needs to act on. And then my other issue is just to try to make sure that if the board is not meeting, that in some fashion the transparency is maintained.
Oh yeah.
And otherwise, you're going to have to go hard and fast, and it's going to be crazy for all schools this fall, and I totally understand that.
We definitely will make that information available on the website. As possible. There's a lot of stuff that we're juggling right now, and quite frankly, the first people who are going to know about the changes are going to be the parents in the school.
Right.
So that's, to me, is the critical component. Those are approved by their governing boards and then presented to the school. Obviously the student handbooks and everything, when all that will have to change. But yes, we will figure out a way to get the amendments on the website. As far as the number 3 thing, I do want to have a discussion about this at some point, but not right now. I'm willing to pull it off right now because I don't want to get into a fight when Dr. Calvin has to leave in 1 minute and we need to vote on this as soon before she goes. Or I'd like to allow her the opportunity to vote on it before she goes. So I'm willing to pull number 3 from this specific request because it does not, I don't think it's relevant at all to schools, what's actually going to happen with existing schools.
Good, thank you.
So,
Okay, so keeping in mind the clock, and recognizing Dr. Calvin is ready to head out, I would entertain a motion to approve the staff's recommendation to allow them to have the flexibility to work with charters to amend their agreements.
Did Mary Ann put a separate recommendation on the table, though?
Oh, to
amend,
consider with as a
Removing number 3.
removing bullet number 3 from the list of things to approve. Thanks, Jill.
I'll second that if Mary Ann's motion. Does that mean Mary Ann moved and I second?
Yeah, so just to be clear for the minutes, the motion was to accept the recommendation, removing number 3 from the list of things that the executive director has authority to approve, if I'm correct.
Yes.
Right.
Okay.
Is this just for the 2021 academic year?
Good question.
Well, that's a great question. And honestly, like, I don't think I put it in. I don't think I put it in there. We can, if you'd like, you can limit it to the 2021 school year. Again, I think at some point we need to have a further discussion about delegation of authority. And, this is something that we talked about a while back. OEI, Mayor's Office, Ball State, none of them bring amendments to their boards. As a matter of fact, all of them, their boards simply do approvals, and that's it. They don't even do renewals or closures. So we're an anomaly in the fact that the board actually weighs in on amendments like these. All of the other authorizers simply do them internally. So I throw that out there. That could be a discussion for another day, but right now I'm concerned for this year.
I would be very comfortable giving you the authority for this year. Those boards have been in existence a lot longer than we have. They've evolved, and so we're evolving. I will say this: I would like to at least have some knowledge as to what's going on. As opposed to, because James, it doesn't just stop with you. People talk to board members, and I don't really enjoy looking like a deer in the headlights going, well, I had no idea. So I appreciate the changing environment and the need for flexibility. I like the proposed amendment that was made. But I do hope that you will keep the board informed so that we know what's going on.
Always. We used to have 9 meetings a year. I'm happy to go back to that. So.
Okay, so I think we should start clean, like a motion to approve the staff's recommendation, removing bullet number 3 for the 2021 school year.
I say so moved.
Second?
Great. Then please confirm your votes by voice. Dr. Calvin?
Yes.
Dillon?
Yes.
Goff?
Yes.
Gutman?
Yes.
Kramer?
Yes.
Ruger?
Yes.
Rummel? Oh, we may have lost Janet.
I just unmuted her, so she
Oh.
should be able.
Yes, I said yes. Sorry, I must have. Thanks.
And Preston, yes. So motion approved.
Thank you, Dr. Calvin. Again, moving forward to the next thing, which I think is much less, I won't say controversial, but is a much less bigger deal. And Dr. Calvin, of course, if you can stick around, I'd love to have you on this one as well. This literally is just a sort of a rehash of my earlier discussion. Due to budget cuts, the 15% reversion requirement, et cetera, we are, but because we are in the middle of this process with the state budget agency and don't really know, A, what they're going to do with our reversion plan, and B, have zero idea what's going to happen during legislative session, that all we're asking for is flexibility to raise the administrative fee by 0.25% if it's determined that existing revenue won't meet expenditures for the fiscal year 21 or fiscal year 22. Any additional proposed increases by that we'll bring to the board for approval separately. I just need to have the ability to tell state budget agency, yes, I have board approval to raise my admin fee. If it comes to that. So that's all I'm asking for at this point. It's just the flexibility. I would love to not have to do it at all, but if it's necessary, I may need to actually make a statement to Zach at the governor's office that I have the authority, the board authority to raise admin fees, and this is what that means. Again, we have significant concerns about raising them too hard, too fast. Particularly of this year, which is why we're proposing postponing it till 21, 22. I have 2021 in there as a just in case things just go completely sideways and state budget agency does something like takes away all of our money and we absolutely need to raise our admin fees immediately. I don't think that's going to happen, but I'm also asking for that flexibility as well. Again, it's just, this would be something normally that would come before the board. Hopefully I don't have to do it, but if I do have to do it, I want to be able to say that I have the authority of the board to do it. So that's the point of this recommendation.
James, I have quite a few questions on this issue.
Okay.
One is, what is your structural surplus right now?
Is Ryan on, or did he jump off to join the mayor's office?
So he is on. He is watching both of them. Ryan, would you be able to answer a question?
I did not catch the question, sorry, because he was just announcing that they're going to go forward with their current budget plans, including the 183 million additional revenue or additional money. But
basically, the question was very quickly, what is our structural surplus?
What is our structural surplus in the dedicated fund?
Yes.
Currently, our balance is, I believe, around $900,000.
Thank you.
And James, what does the? I'd like to go on record saying I was not supportive of the reduction in the administrative fee. For this exact reason, when we reduced our fee a year or so ago, I think 2 years ago, I can't recall. But what does the proposed increase fee raise?
That is impossible to know right now because we don't even know what our existing admin fee. It could range anywhere. Like I said, and you missed this, I think. We estimate prior to the pandemic, we estimated that our existing fee would bring in around $200,000. But with the pandemic, with the uncertainty around the 85% funding and with the uncertainty around enrollment, it could be as low as $170,000 a year. So you add a 0.75 or you add 0.25 to that, what we're trying to do is prepare for the potential inevitability of having to raise the fee higher, but doing so at a responsible rate so that we are not slamming our schools in 1 year with a triple increase. So because we were smart about the surplus, because we kept it as a rainy day surplus, we are able to do this. It allows us to function essentially with the Epicenter purchase and the necessary hiring of a 4th staff member for about 1.5 years, if our appropriation were to go away.
And your appropriation, it may get cut, but it's not going to go away.
Right.
And you do have a surplus. I have some concern. I do not have concerns if as data becomes available. I have some concerns about giving you authority on, well, geez, we just don't know whether or not any of this is going to happen. I think there's just not, I don't have the confidence in, there's a lot of unknowns. And until I know something.
So let me just make sure I understand. You don't have confidence in giving staff or me the authority to commit to a 0.25% raise sometime in the next 2 years if necessary, if expenses, I believe we say if existing revenue won't meet expenditures.
I'm not sure why you need it today and why you can't come back to the board if in fact a doomsday scenario in which you don't get any state funding, in which, you know, the enrollment is tanks, we don't have enough schools.
So there's a big lag in changing admin fees and then when we actually receive the adjusted revenue. So for example, and again, you missed the earlier discussion where in order to meet the 15% reversion, we had to shift a lot of hard and fixed costs to our dedicated fund. And I'm not even sure what the number is. Ryan could probably tell you it wasn't a ton, maybe $50,000. But in order to, if we had to, and Ryan, you can explain this better than I do, but our estimate was that it would take like 12 to 18 months to recoup those expenditures. So this is going to be, has to be a long process. And if the point that I'm trying to make is that if I'm in a meeting with Zach and my budget analyst next week, because they're meeting on Monday to discuss our reversion plan, and they say to me, you need to do X, I would like to be able to say I can do X. Now, if you want me to say, sorry, I don't know if I can do X, I'm going to have to wait until I reconvene my board and ask them if I can do X. I feel uncomfortable with that because honestly, when you're negotiating with budget and all of that, I don't like the idea of telling them I don't know and I won't know for a month or 2 or 3. They'll do whatever they want to do then. And this is a 0.25 increase. This is not, I'm not asking to increase it to 3% or giving ourselves flexibility to increase it any more than 0.225 if necessary. And I honestly, I can tell you right now, it's going to be necessary with our existing appropriation. So if our existing appropriation is decreased, it will become even more necessary. Our existing appropriation was reduced by 30% last year. So it represents the bare minimum for us to function as an agency as we were in 2018. That's what our existing appropriation is. We have now added 7, 8, or 9 schools. And unless we increase our admin fee, we will most likely be, I would most likely have to either probably in 2 years cut staff, further hampering our ability to do the job that we're statutorily required to do, or take other drastic measures. I don't even know what the measures would be. I think our only leverage is the admin fee.
The admin fee that we cut. The admin fee that we cut, right?
Right, after receiving 6 straight years of an appropriation that was pretty thick.
Okay, the admin fee that we cut.
Yes, you're correct. The board cut it 3 times, voted to cut it 3 times over the life of the board's existence.
And okay, thank you.
Okay.
Other comments or questions?
My comment would be that this small staff is a very good value for the charter schools that it authorizes. The amount of support that my understanding is that you've provided over the last few months is invaluable to them. And that authorized is in part what pays for that. The paycheck protection loans, I'm assuming that you've helped with those in terms of advice of how they might go about it. And that alone pays for the tiny increase you're talking about many, many, many times over. So I know you're not asking for approval right now, but I think it actually benefits the schools is what I would say.
And I just want to confirm, I mean, what you're talking about is you're asking us to approve this in a sense for a worst case scenario, sort of a last, as a last, my words are failing me today. I did not sleep well last night.
No, I understand what you mean. And yes,
It's a last resort,
I think
right?
eventually what's going to happen is we will come back to you and say, after this budget session, we now know more about the future. This is going to be a schedule of admin fee increases that we're going to request, right? My only concern is I have some familiarity with dealing with budget, and particularly this budget analyst that we currently have, who is not my favorite budget analyst. And I am simply asking for the ability to be able to have a conversation with them and say that I have approval from my board to raise my admin fee 0.25% proposed in 21-22. And if you want me to come back, like if that's necessary in 21-22, if you want me to come back in 6 months and ask you again, I'm willing to do that. It doesn't matter to me. I just do not want to be in a position where I'm having conversations with the governor's office where I tell them I do not know if I can raise my admin fee and have them make a decision based on that comment, right? Whatever happened in the past happened in the past. Yes, we cut the admin fee, but we cut the admin fee in the past because the board at the time determined that was the best course of action, because it got, not all of the board obviously, but enough of the board, a majority of the board determined that was the best course of action in order to get as much money in the schools as possible. You know, all I am asking for now is being able to have this discussion with budget with some assurance that I can make a commitment to this if it's necessary. And it's not till 21-22. The real reason we're bringing this now is because of the possibility that I would be required to do it starting July 1 this year, right? That's a very real possibility, and I don't have time to come back and ask you for permission for that. I mean, I can, I guess, after the fact, but we would already have to have raised the fee. Like if I have to commit to raising the fee to 0.75 starting in 2 weeks because they're going to take our dedicated fund away. Now, I don't know how dedicated funds work. I didn't set it up. I don't know what the rules are regarding dedicated funds. They require us to revert from it, which seems weird considering it's a dedicated fund. But so who knows what their ability is under this situation for them to say, we're going to take $250,000 from you from your dedicated fund. That may necessitate us having to do this admin fee adjustment earlier. Like, I just don't know. All I'm asking for is the flexibility.
I guess one of my questions is, it seems so maybe I'm bringing it in mind.
That's
If they're
not-
asking you
yeah,
to
that's
take
not-
an action like that, to have an emergency board meeting in order to do that.
That's not how things are operating right now.
Thinking about
So
from
right now, given the
perspective.
ever-shifting, given the ever-shifting
Okay.
budget numbers, that's not how it's happening right now. We were actually approved for a reversion, and then they like literally called us the next day and said, nope, we unapprove you. So like they are moving very quickly and asking us to do, I mean, this is not normal by any circumstances. Normally this would be, you're right, it would be a long drawn out process. But, you know, right now you have the DOE and the legislature and the governor's office squabbling about how we're going to fund schools, right? About whether they're going to get 100% or 85%, which would have a dramatic financial impact on the budget, right? And so they're making decisions, I would say, like very quickly with very little information. And yes, normally you are correct. I would say to them in a normal budget year, I would say, hey, we're proposing to do this. I'm going to bring it before my board. This is not a normal budget year. It is like nothing I've ever experienced. So again, it's not asking for a specific thing. It's just asking for flexibility. And it may not need to be used.
James, I think you have the flexibility to go in and say, here are the different options, with the understanding that this option only exists if the board moves forward on it. I don't understand. I understand. It's always easier when you say, well, here, you don't have to, you can take more money from me, or you can give me less state money because I got this fee increase in my back pocket, and so I'm good to go. I think you can certainly have that conversation with budget. I'm sorry, I mean, for those of us who are around when we had the ERA funds and the bank financial crisis situation, it was another time when everybody was scrambling and trying to figure out how to do the least amount of harm. So I understand the request. The request is, I want to do the least amount of harm. I think you can have those conversations with budget without us giving you this authority at this particular point in time. If in fact the conversation with budget goes south, then I think you can come back to the board and you can lay it out in a manner that clearly shows the need. Because schools are hurting too. I mean, it's just a problem for everybody all the way around.
One of the things I like about the idea of having a meeting, whether it's preceding some kind of formality afterward, is I think that the transparency to the public to be updated that these schools had essentially lost dollars because of a decision to not appropriation is, I think, of public interest to be aware of. And just, I think that there's some benefit to just ensuring that whether we do it now or there's a commitment to have a meeting to get the board together and publicly discuss it immediately thereafter, I think there's some benefit to, for the reasons that Gretchen was laying. It's going to impact the schools, which you talked about at the beginning of the meeting. And so if all of this were to happen without much attention being given to it, I think that that would not be in the general public interest to not know that all of these schools were impacted because of a cut in the appropriation.
Okay. I mean, I respectfully disagree, but we'll survive either way.
Just to clarify my comment, I didn't say that I'm not going to support the motion. I think that if we could modify it to at least say that there would be a board meeting that would bring some discussion that the action was taken or that the recommendation occurred within a reasonable time, I think it would fulfill the same public interest.
I would rather just withdraw the motion, withdraw the recommendation. If there is no flexibility to make the decision, then there is no point in having a follow-up meeting. We'll just do it at the follow-up meeting. I mean, it seems that the feeling is that this flexibility is not, the board does not want to grant this flexibility to the executive director. The board wants to keep this flexibility to itself. And so we will just come back to you when we need to come back to you. So I withdraw the resolution or the recommendation. Now, I guess I don't know if I can do that, actually. I mean, the board can do what the board wants to do, but I will just say that staff will request that you just pull it. Because I don't want, this is not worth a fight right now. I mean, it's not important to me, really, right now.
I think it's fair to say that we're going to have to, we may need to address it at the next board meeting, and there's a possibility we may need to hold an emergency board meeting for this purpose. Right?
Well, we may have, there may be a request for another board meeting anyway in July. That's another section of the agenda. So it's possible we could discuss it then. I would certainly know what SBA says. I won't know anything about what the legislature said at that point, but we'll at least know whether SBA has, my primary fear is that they will deny, well, either one, deny our request for this fourth employee, or somehow not allow us to renew our content management contract. And I would say that that would render us basically non-functional as an agency. But
if I can just ask a question, why is it if we gave you the flexibility to make that commitment and all we did was require this as a discussion item at the next board meeting, how is that not consistent with the memorandum other than ensuring some public transparent discussion of it?
I mean, I guess the point is that that's fine. I mean, we were going to do that anyway, but what I'm getting from this is that the board doesn't want the executive director to have flexibility. So I'd rather not argue it at this point. We can have the conversation later. Like right now we're focused on schools and trying to do the least harm to schools as possible. I wanted to have that in my back pocket for the conversations with SBA because literally they have been screwing us over for the last year. And it is, as you can tell, impacting mental health, like for staff. Like I am so tired and overworked, and I'm sorry if I'm kind of letting myself go a little bit here. I have not had a vacation in 2 years. Literally probably haven't been out of my house in months. I'm probably working 9 hours a day. And, you know, and I'm trying to save the jobs of my staff members. And then at the same time, help 30 schools figure out what in the hell they're supposed to do during a pandemic, it is exhausting. And, you know, it was just a request for another tool in the tool belt, but you know what? I don't need it. We'll figure it out later, right? We will adapt as we have been doing for the last 3 months. And again, I apologize, but it has been a rough 3 months.
Well, just the minutes reflect, my comments were not to not support the flexibility, but just to ensure with some formality that there would be a discussion that had to occur and the impact that it had on schools. And that certainly, in my mind, is consistent with putting schools first to make sure that everyone is cognizant that there wasn't an appropriation or there was a cut in the appropriation and the need to increase the fee. That's why I said whether we give it before, I just want to make sure that there is some discussion and attention given to this occurring. So, if it's being removed, fine. I just wanted to clarify that my position so that it's reflected appropriately in the minutes. I just wanted to make sure that it would have been an item at the following agenda or a meeting somewhat thereafter.
So Kim, I'm sorry, we're very close on our termination period, and we haven't even discussed accountability, which was supposed to be one of the more important discussions, and which is something that is, I think, far more important than this discussion. So I again request that you just remove that from other board business and let's just move on. There are two other things that we need to discuss: accountability and a potential spring application cycle, and I'll explain that. I know that in and of itself does not help. What is your preference?
That's fine, James.
Okay, so why don't we move to accountability? Bridget, do you want to give a very brief discussion about some of the factors weighing into accountability? As brief as possible, because this is going to be really high level at this point.
Hey. Oh, Nikki, you're muting and unmuting me. I'm sorry. Just quickly, as you are all aware, we passed collectively what we felt a great performance framework in January of 2020. That was to take effect the 2019-2020 school year. Given COVID and the closure of schools, all state and federal assessments were canceled. So therefore, much of the academic section of our framework is really not going to be able to be assessed. We can, however, continue with organizational and financial. So we specifically would just looked at our framework, and we want to go ahead and move forward and assess accordingly with what data we have, and then continue to hold our schools accountable based on their continuous learning plans and how they adapted accordingly moving forward. Much of our framework involved trends and was baseline set with 1920. So there's just a lot of discussion between National and Department of Ed on the hold harmless, I learn, and what all of that is going to look like in the future. So we're being very mindful and part of all the conversations moving forward and what that is going to do to the current status of our framework. We just, again, the work that you guys did with us and what you approved, we felt was going to be very, very good and transparent for all of our schools. But we wanted to bring that up to you today with discussion that we've also been mindful of all of that as we have had all of the assessments canceled, both on the state level and federal level, and what that would do to the performance framework. So that is a very brief and quick synopsis.
Far more weedy memo that discusses the impact on each metric and measure in our accountability system. Because this meeting was already had a lot of stuff going on, and because we don't really need to make a decision about it right this second, we're going to continue to work on that memo and then provide it to you, and then have a more robust discussion about the nuances, because we could have had an entire meeting on just our accountability system, and because there's a lot of things at play. Having the gap year did significant, I won't say damage, but significantly impacted the revised system, which makes it very difficult for us to measure a lot of the items that we put in there. So I think that's where we are right now. Suffice it to say, there will be further discussions led by a memo that is much more meaty than this particular discussion. So if there are any questions. So the very last thing on the agenda that sort of got moved around now is this conversation about a spring cycle. As you recall, we postponed our spring cycle primarily because applications were due literally like right when schools were closing, and it was all stay at home, and there was no clarity on open door law. We had no idea what our ability was going to be to actually fulfill any of the duties that we had to do, public hearings, capacity interviews, things like that. And the effect was we had 4 LOIs, one from Elkhart Excel, and after conversing with them, they weren't gonna, they don't want to open until 21, 22 anyway. They're going to come back in the fall. We have not heard from the other 2 two of the other LOI applicants, but to be quite frank, those LOIs were not on their face what I would call, what's the word, super high quality. And we've not heard from either of those individuals since. The reason, but however, we have invited the idea was that I reached out to all 4 of the LOI applicants, the 4th being Edmentum, who wanted to do a virtual school, and literally pulled their application, because I think we canceled the cycle literally like 2 days before the applications were due or something. So the applications were all done. They pulled their application solely because of what was going on with IVS, with Indiana Virtual School, and the fear that, you know, the discussions in the legislature and all of this, that it was going to be a terrible time for them from a timing perspective. Now, keep in mind, they pulled this, they just made this decision like on March 8th or March 5th. So right before COVID hit. And they have, when I reached out to everyone and said, the 4 LOIs, and said, okay, we're having our fall cycle as normal, or we're going to present to the board having our fall cycle as normal. Just wanted to let you know. I got communication from the virtual school folks who said, you know, we still want to open in the fall, and we still, you know, our application is done. You know, we went through the entire process. You canceled your spring cycle. Would it be possible to have an expedited spring cycle where you review our application? Because given the pandemic and given the dearth of virtual options from entities that actually know how to do virtual, I personally thought that it was worthwhile to at least bring to the board. I don't know if many of you know who Edmentum are. They provide, I think they serve half of the school corporations in the state, providing virtual options. They've been an accredited virtual school. They've had an accredited virtual school for 10 or 15 years. And more importantly, they already provide they already have what's now currently a private virtual school providing virtual instruction that is already aligned to Indiana standards. They already have folks in place. For them to open a virtual charter school would literally be shifting of resources. I think it was put to me that they could stand it up in a week if they were approved. We can, as a board, go through the process. There is nothing in statute that requires a particular length of time for an application cycle. There is actually nothing in law that, other than the public hearing, that really requires anything as part of an application cycle other than what is required to be in the proposal. Not that it matters, but Trine approved a virtual school for Phelan in about 2 weeks because of the necessity. I think I talked to Lindsay, it was because of the necessity for providing a virtual option for students who were unwilling to return to the brick and mortar environment. So given these circumstances, I don't even know if this is something that we need to bring before the board because the board is only tasked with reviewing proposals. They're not tasked with setting application cycles. So I think staff has the authority to actually run this spring cycle if they wanted to. Your authority comes in approving or not approving the application. However, regardless of that, I wanted to bring it to the board for discussion because it is unusual. And as I said, all this would be this is not a special dispensation. This would be just a continuation of the spring cycle for those individuals who submitted LOIs within the time frame of the spring cycle and were ready to submit applications when we canceled the spring cycle. Again, I thought it was worth consideration. It is not approving a school by any stretch of the imagination. It is simply saying that we are going to allow schools to go through an expedited process that includes outside evaluators, inside evaluators, a public hearing, and a capacity interview, just like everything else, just in a much shortened time frame, with a decision preferably to be sometime in July, late July maybe, which we've already suggested we might need an emergency meeting for. So again, I wanted to bring this to you all for discussion. You ultimately retain the authority to approve or disapprove any proposals that are brought before you. So if, for example, you are all like, this is a horrible idea, we don't like it, we're not going to do it, then that may impact our decision to actually run the cycle. However, given the circumstances, I think that they make a pretty good case. So with that, I open it up for what looks to be a lot of disapproval.
So James, I think you're right. I think as staff, you have the ability to run the cycle as you see fit, and it's we get to make the ultimate determination about whether or not we agree with the application. So, I mean, obviously, I'm sure folks have opinions about moving forward, but ultimately, it's your process. And if you move forward, then we'll have that meeting, and then we can discuss the merits of the school at that time.
Any other? Janet, I saw you shaking your head. So one of the problems with Zoom, I can see what you're doing.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, sorry. Well, no, my shaking of my head is about Edmonton in particular. I am very familiar with them. That's what Carpe Diem used. We used it at Goodwill Education Initiatives for a long time until we finally parted ways. So anyway, it had nothing to do with like the charter cycle.
No, and actually this is good information because I don't have as much experience with them at all other than what I've seen in their proposal. And so this is
they're very glossy. I actually know someone who used to be one of their sales reps who left, and then gave me a lot of info about why. It's a pretty product. But yeah.
Okay, that is excellent information. Thank you. You need to unmute. Marianne, you need to unmute.
She good now. You're good.
Yeah, I am. I don't have the firsthand familiarity that Janet has, but I've been concerned with Edmentum, with who they have been willing to partner with on a contractual basis, including Indiana Virtual School, including the Indiana Agriculture School that's had a lot of kind of regulatory problems with their charter. And my other thought is, and I agree, a lot of public schools have done contracts with them in the last year or so. It seems like their product is fairly available for families who want to use it throughout the state, and whether through a charter version or whether through a public version. I would wonder if maybe we might not be hurting our charter schools more than anything else by adding it, by adding another reason for their students maybe to leave.
Okay, that's valid.
I also think that I'm not sure if you need to have one more thing to have to do.
Right now, I mean, honestly, like I said, we'll handle whatever comes our way. And it's, to me, what's most important is not losing a significant percentage of kids who simply don't go back to school. I want to give them as many options as possible. And I'm terrified looking at some of these attendance numbers and some of these assignment completion numbers and some of these surveys that we're simply going to lose some kids. They're just going to disappear. And any additional option I can give them. I mean, honestly, like I'm saying this as a person who is not, has always been skeptical of virtual schooling. I've always been skeptical of it. I think Connections does it about as good as anyone does it in the state. And, you know, if I were in a position right now where I felt like uncomfortable sending my kids somewhere, I would probably sign them up for Connections right now, because I know that they do a decent job. And if they're going to do virtual, I don't want to be quite frank, a traditional public school that's never done virtual before, West Clark, to open up a virtual school and all of a sudden be educating my kid. I have no idea how quality the program is. And some of the other schools, again, being quite frank, you know, are partnering with are partnering with folks that I also have problems with, you know, that provide services that I question the value of their services. And there's one in particular that used to have charter schools that is now partnering with quite a few school corporations. And, you know, what guarantee do we have that those folks are, you know, providing anything better than what they were providing in their failing charter schools? You know, for me, the curiosity about Edmentum, and this was before Janet's comment, was that I didn't know much about them. I just knew that they had a lot of partnerships with a lot of school corporations. And, you know, part of our evaluation process would be, how successful is it? Like, how good is the program? Like, I just don't know at this point. But their proposal made sense to me, not having evaluated it, right? Which is why I made the point in the beginning that if there was a proposal, it would be vetted thoroughly by everybody. And then we would have a recommendation with all of this information. And I would somehow wheedle that anecdotal information out of Janet, you know, about, you know, the dirt, because, you know, I think it's relevant. And we would make a decision based on that. And so that was my only thinking in this. You know, I won't say it's abject panic out there. And Leslie, I'm sure if you if anybody can speak to this more than anyone on this call, like, it's panic. It's like people have no idea what to do. And I don't know how you guys are handling it and how you guys are keeping your chins up and trying to figure out how to deal with the various situations. But the more I know, like, the more terrified I am for fall, to be honest with you. I'd love to hear your comments on this.
We just have some work going on in the house, so excuse the noise in the background. I know one thing in Gary, we were just hit with the possibility of not being able to go back into the brick and mortar via our health department because of our COVID cases. So, and I have another emergency meeting too right after this one.
It's okay. You can go.
Everybody's scrambling. What I will say in the schools, and for families, the more new things they have, the more frustrated they'll be. Yeah. And I think right now what we're doing virtual summer school, and our students actually love it, and they have their actual teachers that they're familiar with, or teachers within the building. So I think those type of platforms work well. I'm not familiar. I've heard of Admentum,
right,
but I'm not familiar with their staffing. And are they able to build relationships? Because that's that will be the key for children if they have to be forced at home. And,
I agree.
And that's the biggest piece. So for me, I will wait to see what they're proposing and to get more familiarity with how they run things. But the more you add to the schools and to the staff, the worse the outcome, in my opinion, it will be. It'll be more frustrating.
Yeah.
Because it's such a short notice. But everybody's scrambling. I completely feel your frustrations.
Yeah. No, my sympathies are out for you. I mean, to have the health department say you can't go back to your buildings, that's huge. And hopefully you all can work that out.
And so, we, with the charter school board, have several schools in Gary as well. So I don't know what that looks like, what's going on, even with the state. And everybody's just so much hands off to leaving everybody else to have to figure it out. But even lawyers are just the liability. It's a scary time, and just the greatest concern is what's going to happen to our children academically.
Well, I would say the greatest concern is health, but beyond that, I totally agree with you. I mean, I have 3 kids. I'm terrified about what's going to happen to them.
Right.
But yeah, I am hopeful that what I have seen, and I don't know if you've seen this, and I'm sorry, this is a side conversation. Y'all can, I think the meeting is that I have never seen so much collaboration as I've seen in the last couple of months. Folks that never talked to each other before are now routinely meeting and having conversations because they know that this is not the time to be competitive. It's the time to be collaborative. And that has been inspiring. Some of the best Zoom meetings, to the extent there is such a thing as a good Zoom meeting, that I've been on have been ones where school leaders have simply had dialogues with one another. And so I'm hoping that throughout all of this, new relationships will develop, that best practices will finally start to be shared, and that we'll get. I know we'll get through it. I just hope we get through it without too much damage. And I guess that's my soapbox moment. And now I'm going to stop talking. Thank you.
So James, on the question of the spring cycle, I think it's staff discretion, and we're obviously not in a position as a board to make any sort of recommendation today, but if you choose to go forward with the cycle, we'll evaluate the application and go.
I think what we'll do is we'll wait to hear from the 2 other folks, and then I'll have a conversation with the Admentum folks and say, guys, we can move forward with it, but there may be some pushback, and if you want to push forward with it, then we'll make it happen. But if you feel like, again, that this isn't the right time, then so we'll leave it up to them.
Okay.
Obviously the last thing I want is to add another cycle to my that's as far as my own mental health, that's a lot. And Bridget and Nikki and Ryan, it's the last thing that is probably what we need right now. But again, we just want we want options, right? We want what's best for kids. So
yeah.
Anyway, thanks for the discussion. And I think that is all we had.
Did we cover it all?
Yeah, unless anyone has any other comments or concerns just about anything. Kind of wish Gretchen had been here during the initial state of the agency discussion. And maybe I'll reach out to her and have a conversation about that.
Yeah.
But other than that.
Okay. Well,
James, what is the earliest date that any of the schools do plan to open? Do you know?
So our schools?
Uh-huh.
Don't
Are
know.
there any before August or not?
Of our schools, so let me, you know what, let me really quickly, because I asked for like a summary and I got about half of them to respond, and I'm just looking to see if any of them, I don't recall. Oh, you know what? So some of the Excel centers might.
Adult high schools, yeah. Adult high schools go back in July.
Yeah, they'll go back in July, but I don't think any of the normal K-12 schools are planning to go back before August.
Oh, that's good. Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Right. Anything else today? Then I would most definitely entertain a motion to.
So moved.
We have a second.
I'll second.
All right.
Thank
you guys.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you guys for everything and for sticking it out, and stay safe out there.
Thanks. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you. Well, I thought James might have stayed on, but
Yeah, me too.
here, I'll shoot him see if he wants to pop back in. Thank you for, Ryan, thank you for sending that. I went ahead and shared it just via chat, and then I saw that you had emailed it as well. But I just shared it in the chat during the meeting with Bridget and James and Chair Preston.
Yeah, it was surprising in this household. But as Stacy put, hopefully people won't be complaining in the fall.
Yeah.
It still doesn't help if people don't send their kids to school.
Yeah.
You know, that's more than the loss of an ADM number is way more than, you know, a couple $100 from giving away 50% or 15%.
Yeah. Well, thank you for staying on and doing both. Oh, hold on one second. You know what I'm going to do? I will
Stop recording.
Stop the recording.